There is a specific moment between hearing a request and opening your mouth to answer it. A window, maybe 2 seconds wide, where theoretically a different word could come out. You know what that word is? You have known what that word is for years. And something happens in that window, every time, reliably, across decades. That makes it impossible to use it. What comes out instead is yes, sometimes enthusiastically, sometimes with a laugh that you don't feel, sometimes in a voice so flat that you can hear yourself not meaning it, and you say it anyway, and then the window closes, and you are committed. And the familiar weight arrives, the one that starts in your chest and settles somewhere lower where it will stay for days. Today, that window is what we're looking at. Not your backbone, not your boundaries, not your willingness to be used. The window, what's in it. And why no was never actually available there the way everyone assumed it was. At some point, probably more than once, probably from more than one direction, someone looked at this pattern and gave it a name. Pushover. People pleaser. Too eager to be liked. No backbone. Maybe it was said out loud. Maybe it was the subtext of a look, a sigh, a conversation that happened about you rather than with you. Maybe you arrived at the verdict yourself, because when the behavior keeps happening and you can't explain it, you eventually become the explanation. And here is what those labels did. Over time, they didn't just describe a behavior, they described a character. And once they became part of how you understood yourself, every subsequent yes confirmed them. You said yes to covering a shift you didn't have capacity for, and you filed it under. Spineless. You agreed to host something you didn't have the energy for, and you filed it under. Can't say no. You let a conversation go somewhere you didn't want it to go because stopping it felt worse than surviving it, and you filed it under weak. The record got very long, and the interpretation of the record stayed exactly the same. Something is wrong with you at the level of character. It makes complete sense that you internalize this. When a behavior repeats that consistently and no one offers another explanation, the person exhibiting the behavior becomes the only explanation available. But the explanation was never your character. It was a two-part neurological event that was completing itself before the part of you responsible for choosing had a chance to arrive. That's what was happening in the window. So what actually happens in those 2 seconds? Let's start with the first mechanism. Research on ADHD consistently identifies something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, RSD, as one of its most underreported features, not a mood, not a personality trait. A neurological response pattern. What it means specifically is this. The ADHD brain processes the threat of disapproval, or even the possibility of it, with a speed and intensity that is not under conscious regulation. It does not wait for the situation to be evaluated. It does not wait for you to decide whether this person's opinion matters. It fires before any of that. The moment a request arrives, a part of your brain has already run the calculation. If I say no, what happens to this relationship, this dynamic, this person's face? Not consciously, not deliberately, automatically, in the time it takes for the words to finish reaching you. And the answer that comes back before you've thought anything is, don't risk it. That's the first part. Now here is the second. The ADHD brain also processes response timing differently. Studies on executive function in ADHD show a consistent pattern. The gap between stimulus and response is narrower. The brake, the mechanism that would slow the system down long enough for deliberate thought to enter, is slower to activate, which means by the time the part of you that knows what you actually want has assembled itself and is ready to speak, the yes is already out. That is what was happening in the window. Not cowardice, not a failure to value yourself. Two neurological processes, moving faster than your deliberate voice, completing a transaction you didn't authorize, and leaving you standing there holding the receipt. This is not a metaphor. This is the sequence. The no was not available in that moment the way everyone around you assumed it was. The way you assumed it was. Willpower could not have reached it in time. It wasn't a willpower problem. It never was. Now the harder part, because understanding the mechanism doesn't immediately dissolve the weight of what the mechanism has cost. There are relationships in your history that carry the shape of this. Friendships where you were always the one who showed up and rarely the one who was asked how she was doing. Because you had established reliably that you would show up regardless. Work histories where you took on more than your share and were thanked for it in ways that made it harder to stop, because the yes was rewarded, which trained the system to keep producing it. Intimate relationships where the chronic yes quietly became resentment, not announced, not processed, just accumulated, until one day you noticed that you were angry in a way you couldn't explain to someone who had never been told no by you. The specific exhaustion of this is not the individual yes, it's the aftermath. The weight of having committed to something your body didn't agree to. The performance of being fine with it. The private accounting that never quite balanced. And underneath all of that, this. You were managing a two-part neurological event in real time, alone, with no language for what it was, while performing the appearance of someone who chose this freely, while people around you saw a woman with no boundaries and filed their own verdict, while you confirmed theirs with yours. The years of being called a pushover, the relationships that carry the invoice of your chronic yes, the version of yourself you imagined if you could only learn to say no. None of that was proof. The label was the wrong explanation for the right observation. The behavior was real. The cause was invisible. And you navigated 30-odd years of social life with a mechanism no one identified and a verdict everyone agreed on. That is not a character failure. That is an extraordinary amount of time carrying something that had a name you were never given. If this video opened something, if you are sitting with a particular feeling of understanding a mechanism that explains years of something you hated about yourself, the next layer is language. Not scripts for forcing a no in the moment. Frameworks built for before and after, for the conversations that live on either side of the window, where your deliberate voice actually has time to arrive. The language pack is in the description. It was built for exactly this. So what actually shifts once you understand all this? Here is what does not change when you understand this. The 2-second window. The RSD response will still fire. The impulse timing is still what it is. The mechanism doesn't dissolve because it's been named. Here is what does change. You stop treating in-the-moment override as the goal. Because now you know that in-the-moment override requires a speed your deliberate voice cannot reliably reach in time. Expecting it to is not discipline. It's designing a system for a brain that isn't yours. What your brain actually needs is something different. It needs upstream intervention. Decisions made before the window opens, not inside it. This looks like knowing in advance which categories of requests you do not have capacity for right now. Not in theory, specifically. This week, this month. At this level of depletion, when that's already decided, the window becomes less critical because the answer isn't being generated in real time. It was already there. The window is just the delivery. It looks like noticing the situations where RSD is loudest, because RSD doesn't fire equally in all directions. It fires hardest where the relationship feels most precarious, where the approval feels most conditional, where the history of that particular dynamic has trained your nervous system to treat any friction as a threat. Those are not situations to test your resolve in. Those are situations to prepare for. It also looks like, and this is the part that requires the most honesty, recognizing that no delivered after the fact is still no. The yes that came out of the window is not a legally binding contract. You are allowed to follow up, to say, I said yes, and I shouldn't have. I don't have the capacity for this right now. That conversation is uncomfortable, but it is not the catastrophe the RSD mechanism predicts. And every time you have it, when you're ready, in your own time, with language that fits your brain, the record gets one entry that doesn't confirm the old verdict. Not evidence of who you are, evidence that the mechanism is not the whole story. If you want the frameworks for those conversations, before the window and after, the language pack in the description was built for this exact gap. What's the one situation where you find it hardest to say no, and what does it cost you afterward? There are years in this you won't get back. The relationships that absorbed your chronic yes and never asked what it cost you. The jobs that recognized your compliance and called it dedication. The version of yourself you imagined. The one with boundaries, the one who knew her own limits, the one who didn't say yes and then spent 3 days recovering from it. That version kept almost existing. Knowing this doesn't give those years back, but it does change what they mean. Every yes that came out of the window when you wanted no, that was not evidence of weakness. That was a nervous system doing the only thing it could do with the information it had and the time it had to respond. You were not failing to be brave. You were managing something neurological, alone, with a verdict already installed and no counter-evidence allowed. The counter-evidence is allowed now, not because you fixed the mechanism, because you've finally seen it, And a mechanism you can see is one you can begin to work with, upstream, carefully, in the conditions where your deliberate voice actually has time to reach you. The window is still 2 seconds wide. What's different now is that you know what's in it. Not laziness, not weakness, not the final word on who you are. A brain responding to threat at the speed it was built to respond before you could get there. You were never the problem. Neither was the yes. The problem was the silence around the mechanism that made the yes feel like a confession. It wasn't. It never was.